Alrighty, so for our next item, which is another code along, we're going to talk about conditionals and comparison operators. And the first thing I'll just give you, we're going to continue working in the W3 private repo. Now I still have my live server going, and I have commented out all the code that we wrote before. Okay, that's how I have my editor and code at this point. So what I want you to do is actually click on this link before we start coding, because what we're about to enter is something that is kind of one of those fundamental, and building blocks is perfect, which is where we're at in the JavaScript guide, right, for in MDN, which is I'm trying to gravitate more towards for my organization. And what I recommend here is that you read through and start to understand, right? Because we've all made decisions in our lives. We make them countless times a day. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use that idea of a conditional statement, okay? And write that in JavaScript. So reading through this, I think will be helpful before we're actually going to write some conditional logic here in a minute. Okay, so if condition, then run code. Else, right? So if this condition and this evaluates to a true or a false, if it's true, right, run the code. Else, right, run some other code instead. So if this is false, we run this code. Now these if else or if, and you can actually now, so instead of if, you could have it if else if, sorry, here. And you'll actually see that in what we're going to code today. But I highly recommend, like I said before, you read through this, because it shows you examples of different ways to write the if condition, because you could just write the if condition on its own without the else, right? I mean, it just, it gives you, and here's some better real world examples. And we haven't talked about this, but I believe, well, if we don't cover it, I don't think we will, but I will talk about it. And it's, anyway, I'll get there. Okay, so and then this actually builds a web example, which is not bad. It might be fun to go do that, I think. Okay, and actually here's, and I'm going to leave this here because I want to come back to it in a little while. So I would say read through there where it says note on comparison operators. We'll come back and talk about this. Okay, so let's move over to the editor, go to the bottom, right? Because I think these things, when we talk about them and we have you look at documentation, are great. But I think it's actually better, and you can tell me if this is true, when we actually do something that's more real. Like, because some of this, I mean, this was a little more real up here, but some of it was kind of like, what's the point and when would I use that? So in thinking about this code along, I thought, well, where is something we could use? Because I thought about decisions in my own life, and honestly, I would suggest you think about decisions you make every day and try to code some. I think those are good things to try to do. But I thought what I would do, and I haven't provided this link again, but you can go find it or I'll include it, is to the carbon footprint. And I thought what we would do is take this first one, right? So calculating the carbon footprint points is we're going, on the first category is the number of people, right? Because this is not perfect, but it's a good example of conditional logic. If you live alone, right? You're higher than somebody who lives in an apartment with a lot of other people. Lot, I should say, depending on the number. This is because you share, right? Electricity, fuel costs, and dwelling, your dwelling up and running. Okay? So how can we write code that implements this logic? Right? So we use conditional statements or if statements, right? This is also called logic. So that's the other thing, is the logic of how you make a decision in a programming language. It's also logic when you do it in your life, but sometimes we don't refer to it that way. So let's leave this open, and then I'm going to move over to here. So what do we need to do, right? And I could just copy this content, right, to have it. Come over here, and I could do the comment so that I have it in here, right? So at least I don't have to go back and forth. You don't have to. Might be helpful. So if you live alone, right, your points are 14 points, right, if you live alone. So how in code could we represent that? Well, we could set up a variable. We know that, right? So we could say const, right? And we could call it, there's various ways we could call this. We could call it carbon points, right? We could call it carbon footprint, and actually print would be lowercase, right? Points, PTS, or points, right? You can, so you might look at this and wonder which is more clear, right? So if we abbreviated that, and now we're going to actually assign this variable a value, okay? And we could, you could think of it, could we just say 14? Well, yeah, that would assume if you live alone, okay? So I would start it at 0, and then I would set up another variable, and I would say, right, number in household equals, okay? So we could start with, now if you live alone, that would be 1, okay? And then you can change this variable, of course, to be so that we can test, and this is an important thing, we can test our logic after we write it. Okay, so let's go back just to remember, how do we write if statements, right? If you're not sure, we see several examples here. Right, so let's scroll up and look at a very simple one. Right, if condition, then do something. Okay, so let's do if, what? If number in household, right? Now in this case you might think equals 1. Well, in this case it gets to the comparison that I was talking about before. And now I feel bad that I rolled up, because here's where I wanted you to see this. So if we want to say, is it equal, comparison operator, right? These, what we've been using with the equal has been the assignment. Now where that can be a little confusing is we used addition. So you'd be like, well, wait a minute, we did use addition. Well, actually what that was we were evaluating this side of the statement and setting the value of the variable to that, okay? So in this case, what we really want to do is we could do, there's actually a double and a triple equal, and we'll talk about one strictly equal. What's the other one? I don't remember the name of the other one, but it's basically there's different ways to say equality, but in this case the primitive value, in this case it's right a number, would also be equal to whatever the variable is, okay? So if number in household equal 1, okay, and now you're going to see something called a code block. And this code block you're going to see throughout the programming language, whatever programming language you take. And I'm going to hit enter there to give me a line, because I'm writing code now if this condition is true. If true, remember it evaluates 1, it evaluates this variable, is it equal to 1, right? So if it's equal to 1, then what do we want to say? We want to say carbon footprint. What do we want to do based on our logic? Is if you live alone, add 14 points. Now this is where you could do a couple things. You could say let new points equal. Okay, that might be a tempting thing to do, 14. Right? That is one thing you could do. You could also just create a variable that you add, right? So you could just say, there's multiple ways you could do this. I'm trying to keep it simple, so I don't want to go over all those ways. But what I could do is take whatever the value in the points is now and add the 14 to it. So I could do carbon footprint points equals to carbon footprint points plus 14. Okay, so again, there's multiple ways to do it. This is just kind of one way. This is where when you're writing logic, there's so many different ways to do that. Okay. Now, if we did else, right? Could we do our next one here, right? Because if you live with one other person, which would be 2 in the household, would the else, if we did it here, would this be correct, right? And the answer is only in the condition, right, that it was 2. But what if you had 3? Right? That wouldn't work, which would kind of make sense, but it's not going to check for 3. It's only going to check if we stop here. So that's where, right, and we'll just say, right, console.log cannot, oh, that's right, I committed to double. No points updated. Okay? Just so you can see this. Let's say 1. Okay, we're going to fix it in a minute. So if I come over here, oh, I get an error. Okay? Because, and not because of this, but because of this, meaning this line on 48. And let's see what it says. It says assignment to a constant variable, type error. Well, do you remember me saying that this, when we use const, it's going to be a read-only value. So when we're writing a line like this, which is a very common line in JavaScript, what will happen is it'll try to redefine this variable. And you can't do that with const, which is a perfect example of using let. Okay? So that's an example. Like I said, use const unless you can't. It's kind of my logic. Okay? Now, let's scroll down here and see this, right? So we know that it is 1, right? Remember, strictly equal. Is it equal? Is number in household equal to 1? Well, we know it is based on looking at it, but we can also have the code show it to us, right? By hitting a breakpoint right here. And breakpoints are, again, places you stop your code so that you can see it run, refresh the screen, and now if I say if number, this is the line that's going to be executed, and yes, that now we see that that was 0 and 0, and we're going to add 14 to it. And now if I scroll back, I can see that that is now 14. And if I wanted to in my code, or just down in here, or just be confident because I could see it, I'd say carbon footprint, right? Tab. And it would show me 14. Okay? Did I realize the other day I had to do that? You can also clear the console that other way. Okay. So does that hopefully make sense? Is that clear? So now let's continue coding. Okay? Let's continue coding the other conditions that could possibly exist. So now, instead of an if here, or instead of an else, we're going to do another if statement. So else if. Now, we could just, and I'm not going to, but we could just do if number in household equal to 2. Now, why wouldn't we do that? Right? Why wouldn't we do that is that the computer would have to evaluate each of these. And the way we're going to write it, it's only going to have to run through our logic one time and only do the calculation once, so it's more efficient. So instead of an else, we're going to do else if, okay? And so now we can go up here and we can say, I'm going to copy that, paste it in here, and now I'm going to say 2. Right? Because if the number is more than 1, now we add 12 points. Okay? Oh, sorry. It doesn't go there because I got to have my code block. And this is where I'm going to go up, copy this line right here. paste it in here, and do 12. Okay? And then else, I actually could have left that other else in there. Console log no update 2 points. Okay? I want you to see this. Okay? So now, let's go ahead and let it finish running. We still have our breakpoint here. Okay? And we could step through the logic. We know it's going to run this line, and then it jumps to the bottom. And really what this says, and this is what is important to understand, is once it finds the condition to be true, it only runs the line associated with that code block. Okay? So that if I said 3 here, what code block, I want you to answer this. If I said 3, which code block, so put this in your note, so put this, right? Answer my question about which code block here. And again, I know it's tempting to just go run the code, but this is where you start to understand the code. You know, which code block will run. Okay? All right. Now, so let's see, did you get the right answer? Because I'm going to go ahead and let it run. I'm going to run it again. Now I have 3 in here, so I'm going to watch. I'm going to refresh it. I'm going to hit step. So now I already know it jumped. It didn't execute this line because this condition was false. By the way, another fun thing you can do if you're ever in question based on the logic is you can always copy, and then the console will tell you if that's false. Now it's easy for us to see in this example that it is, but in a more complex example it may not be. Okay, so let's go ahead and step through. So now, yeah, no points were updated. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to now pause. Okay, so now pause the video and attempt to write the code for the remaining conditions. Okay. Now, if you don't get it, it's okay, right? So there's 2 conditions, like you get working code, right? So let's see. Sorry. Once you work on it, then commit, and I'll put this in the message, code challenge. Okay? I'll do these periodically through code alongs, and this is just your first one. So here's the outcome. So the outcome of your coding challenge can be, you know, I'll see working code. The output could be, you know what, I didn't get working code. So if you want full points, right? And really this is where it's so easy to go find an answer somewhere, or to even go to the next, you know, part of the video that I'm going to go over so that you can, right, see the answer. But that's not where you learn. And remember, part of this class is you coming into code review so I can assess how well you have learned to code. Okay, so that's the idea. So if, and here's my other, and you'll hear me say this as we move forward, if you did not get working code, that is okay, right? Just tell me what you tried and leave your code unchanged, okay? So that's what I want to see. And so there's your code challenge, right? So there's our first part of this. And then what I'll do is pick it up on the next one and finish it up, and then talk about more of those comparison operators as well. All right.